A single spoon, a single death. But could it unravel a deeper crime? Welcome to WordScript Den. I am your host, Denora. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you joining from? Your voices make this journey extraordinary. Let's begin. The trouble started, as it often does, at an hour most respectable people reserve for coffee and silence. At 9:05 sharp, I had just finished setting Wolfe's breakfast tray aside when the doorbell rang. Fritz looked at me like I'd forgotten to pay the gas bill, though it wasn't my finger on the bell. Nobody rings at Wolfe's brownstone before noon without a death wish or a fool's calendar. I opened the door and found a woman holding a polished wooden case the size of a violin box. She wasn't dressed for errands: silk blouse, pearl brooch, gloves that had never seen a subway rail. She had the kind of face that had been trained to wait until spoken to, though her eyes were darting like she'd misplaced something important and didn't want anyone to notice. "My name is Mrs. Callista Veron," she said. "I must speak to Mr. Wolfe. It's regarding a theft." I told her the facts as Wolfe prefers them. He doesn't speak to anyone before his orchids have had their morning compliment. And a theft wasn't usually enough to rearrange the sanctity of his schedule. Murder, maybe. Arson on a good day. But the lady insisted, clutching that wooden case like it was hiding the bones of her ancestors. "It's not money," she said quickly. "It's something older. And it may be connected to my husband's death last year. That word, the last one, was the key. Even my eyebrow knew it. Wolfe doesn't step out for anything short of the apocalypse, but certain words act on him like a lever on a stone. Death, insult, gastronomy. And since one had just been dropped in the foyer, I let Mrs. Veron in. She perched on the red leather chair in the office like a bird, deciding whether the branch would hold. Wolfe didn't look up when we entered. His eyes were shut, his lips moving silently as he considered some horticultural mystery. "Archie," he said, without opening his eyes, "why are you disturbing me before the orchids are content?" "Because," I said, "we have a lady with a box, a dead husband, and a problem she wants to rent your brain for." That got him. Wolfe's eyes opened, slowly, and when he saw the case on her lap, his brows shifted almost imperceptibly, which in Wolfe's lexicon is the equivalent of fainting dead away. "Set it there," he said, pointing to his desk blotter. "And tell me, Mrs. Veron, what has a spoon to do with murder?" "Would you like me to continue building the next section?" the brownstone disturbed. "Where Wolfe tolerates outsiders invading his sacred space. Or should I expand this opening hook a bit more before moving forward?" Mrs. Veron hesitated, as if she were still debating whether to trust Wolfe with whatever she had dragged across the city. She rested the wooden case on her knees and pressed her gloved fingers against its surface. I had seen plenty of nervous clients in that chair, and she was running the standard script: tense shoulders, dry lips, the works. What set her apart was the way her eyes kept sliding to Wolfe, searching for a flicker of interest. She was smart enough to know he was the one she needed, not me. "Theft, you said," Wolfe murmured, settling his bulk further into the chair. "But you brought that box intact?" Her lips parted in a tight smile. "The box is intact. Its contents are not." She unlatched the case and I stepped closer out of habit. Inside lay a piece of silver that, to my eyes, looked like something a European count might stir his sugar with. A spoon, old enough to have a history book written about it. But it was plain something was wrong. The handle was bare, the inlay that should have marked its crest missing, jagged edges showing where something had been pried loose. "It was my husband's most valued possession," she said. "An heirloom. He guarded it obsessively. He died last year, officially of a heart seizure. Afterward, the spoon came to me. But 2 weeks ago, I found the emblem missing. It had been there for centuries. Someone removed it, and I want to know why." I gave her the professional squint. "Lady, we're talking about a spoon, not a diamond tiara. What makes you think it matters enough for us to care?" She met my eyes without blinking. "Because whoever took it knew my husband died protecting it. And because yesterday, someone broke into my home and left a note warning me not to speak of it. That caught me. Break-ins and warnings have a way of moving a case from curiosity to business." Wolfe, of course, remained still. His fingers steepled, his eyes narrowed to slits. He let the silence stretch until Mrs. Veron began to fidget with her gloves. Then he spoke, each word weighed like gold bullion. "You have not informed the police." "I cannot," she replied quickly. "The family." "My husband's associates. There are complications, but I can pay." Wolfe closed his eyes again, which for him was the equivalent of pacing the floor. I knew that when he shut out the room, he was sorting threads, testing their strength. After a long moment, he reopened them. "Archie," he said, "record her particulars. Full name, address, telephone. Then fetch the note from her, if she has it." Mrs. Verron produced an envelope from her handbag and slid it across the desk. I opened it and found a sheet of cream paper, the kind sold in expensive shops, with 4 typed words: "Leave the past buried." "No signature, no mark, madam," Wolfe said, his tone firm. "I will consider your proposition. For now, leave the spoon here. I shall decide its worth." Her eyes widened. "How you mean?" "I mean," Wolfe interrupted, "I will retain it until I have examined the matter. If you wish my attention, you must permit me control. If you object, there is the door." She hesitated, then nodded. With a hand that trembled slightly, she closed the case, set it on Wolfe's desk, and stood. I escorted her to the door. She left without another word. When I returned, Wolfe had not moved, except that his eyes had fixed on the box like it was a chess piece demanding a solution. "Well," I said, lowering myself into the chair opposite, "we've got ourselves a missing emblem. A dead husband and a lady with nerves. What's the verdict? Do we take the case or chalk it up as spoon nonsense?" Wolfe's lips curved in the barest ghost of a smile. "Archie, nothing that unsettles a woman of her poise is nonsense. Someone has chosen to trespass upon my house with intrigue. That is intolerable. We shall proceed." Wolfe didn't elaborate, which was his way of telling me the conversation was over until he chose otherwise. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and breathed out through his nose like a monk trying to forget there was a world outside his orchids. I knew the signs. He was filing away possibilities, letting them ferment. My job was to poke at the edges until something useful spilled out. "So," I said, tapping the envelope with the typed warning, "we've got a dead man with a heart that may or may not have been squeezed by nature, an heirloom spoon with a missing crest, and a widow who thinks burglars write polite notes instead of stealing silver. If you ask me, it sounds like the start of a very long joke." "You are not asked," Wolfe muttered. He opened his eyes briefly. "The emblem. Describe it." "She didn't bring it, remember?" I said, "It's missing. What used to be on the handle is gone. A crest, maybe a family coat of arms, maybe a fraternity logo. Hard to say. You'll have to use your imagination." "I prefer not to," he snapped, then fell back into silence. His patience for speculation without data was about the size of a thimble. Since he wasn't planning to do more than brood, I picked up the case, opened it again, and studied the spoon. It was heavy, tarnished in a way that looked deliberate, like someone had taken care to keep it aged but not ruined. The handle's end had a square socket where something had been lodged, probably with skill, and removed with equal care. Whoever pried it out hadn't left tool marks which suggested experience. "It was not a thief," Wolfe said suddenly, eyes still closed. "A thief would take the spoon entire, melt it, sell the silver. This was no vandalism. The removal was precise, purposeful." He opened his eyes and looked at me. "Someone wanted only the emblem." "Fine," I said. "So now we're chasing a decorative button. What's the plan? Hire Sol to haunt every pawnshop in the city?" Wolfe's lips tightened. "Do not be obtuse. We must know what that emblem signified and to whom." He shifted his bulk in the chair. "Archie, call Mrs. Verron. Request she return at 3 o'clock, prepared to furnish a list of her late husband's associates. Personal, professional, familial. Every name. Then speak with Lon Cohen. See if the Gazette has ever mentioned a Verron in connection with antiquities, societies, or litigation." That was a start. I scribbled the instructions, though I didn't need to. I could recite Wolfe's orders in my sleep. Still, he liked it when the words hit the page. It meant the wheel was in motion. By noon, I had Fritz serving lunch, corn cakes with a sauce Wolfe pretended not to enjoy until the 3rd helping, and I made my call to Lon Cohen. Lon always liked it when I dangled Wolfe's name. It meant he might get a scoop later. He promised to dig and call back. After that, I reached Mrs. Verron's secretary, who confirmed her employer would return promptly at 3. She had that brisk, efficient tone that says, "I don't believe in mysteries, just schedules." Wolfe didn't stir from his chair the entire time. At 2 o'clock he finally rang for beer, drank it with the solemnity of a judge passing sentence, and said, "Archie, it will not be the widow alone who returns. Others will appear as flies do when sweetness is exposed." That was Wolfe's way of predicting trouble with a smile. I didn't argue. If someone had gone to the trouble of stealing a crest and leaving cryptic notes, odds were they weren't finished. And if they weren't finished, the brownstone was about to get lively, which, as Wolfe saw it, meant disturbed. At 3 sharp, the bell rang again. I opened the door, half expecting Mrs. Varen. She was there, but she wasn't alone. 2 men stood with her, each one stiff enough to snap if bent the wrong way. One had a lawyer's briefcase. The other had the jawline of a man who considered smiling beneath him. I ushered them into the office. Wolfe lifted his head, his gaze sweeping over them with the slow precision of a man weighing meat at a butcher's counter. "Mr. Wolfe," Mrs. Varen began, her voice tight, "I hope you don't mind. These gentlemen insisted on accompanying me. My brother-in-law, Leonard Varen, and Mr. Harold Kent, our family's attorney." Wolfe's lips twitched, though whether with amusement or irritation was impossible to say. "Madam, you will learn that I mind everything. Sit," they did. And just like that, the brownstone was no longer quiet, it was occupied. Exactly the way Wolfe hated it, and exactly the way mysteries have to begin. Leonard Varen had the kind of shoulders that looked like they'd been bred for rowing, but the eyes of a man who would rather see you sink than toss you an oar. He sat stiffly on the edge of the red chair, his gaze bouncing between Wolfe and the case on the desk. Harold Kent, the lawyer, adjusted his tie with the same rhythm as a man polishing a weapon, then leaned back, occupying space as if the chair belonged to him by legal precedent. Mrs. Varen, caught between them, folded her gloves in her lap and stared at the spoon's case like it was a coffin lid. Wolfe allowed the silence to stretch. He was good at that. People rushed to fill silence, and silence in Wolfe's hands became a net. Leonard cracked first. "My sister-in-law," he said, his voice low but clipped, "is prone to dramatics. I warned her not to drag this nonsense to you. That spoon is a trinket, nothing more. My brother cherished it, yes, but obsession doesn't make a bauble significant." "Obsession," Wolfe repeated, as if savoring the word. His eyes closed briefly, then reopened. "You mean your brother lavished attention upon it, guarded it, valued it above reason, and yet now that it is damaged, you dismiss it?" Leonard's jaw tightened. "I dismiss her claim that someone is threatening her over it." Kent cleared his throat. "Mr. Wolfe, let me be clear. Mrs. Varen may employ you if she wishes, but the family does not sanction any investigation that would sully my late client's name. Mr. Varen's estate is closed, his affairs settled. We do not want outsiders, especially the press, meddling in private matters." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "That's interesting," I said. "Because nobody's mentioned the press except you. Makes me think you're more worried about headlines than heirlooms." Kent's eyes flicked to me, cool and flat. "Young man, I am worried about preserving dignity. And dignity seldom survives in newsprint." Mrs. Varen's voice trembled as she broke in. "Mr. Wolfe, I came because I believe my husband's death may not have been as simple as it appeared." And now the emblem is gone. "You must understand. He once told me that if anything ever happened to it, the truth about him would come out. That dropped into the room like a stone into a pond." Wolfe leaned forward an inch, his version of lunging across a table. His eyes fixed on her. "Repeat that, madam, verbatim," she swallowed. "I said, if anything happens to this spoon, people will know what I really was." I thought it was just his dramatic way of talking. But then he died, and now this. Leonard shot her a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Callista, that is absurd." "Is it?" Wolfe asked so mildly it was lethal. He turned his gaze to Leonard. "You knew your brother. Did he speak thus?" Leonard shifted in his seat, but he didn't answer. Kent was quicker. "Idle words, Mr. Wolfe. A man near the end often seeks to make his life appear larger than it was. My client was a businessman, not a conspirator. Idle words do not invite burglary," Wolfe said coldly. He let his eyes drift back to the case. "Archie." "The note." I slid the envelope across to him. He didn't touch it, just gestured. "Show them." I laid the note on the desk. 4 little words. "Leave the past buried." Leonard glanced once and snorted. Kent took longer, his lips thinning, his eyes calculating. Mrs. Varen stared at it as though it might burst into flames. Wolfe's voice was calm, precise. "Madam, you have my services. The spoon remains here. I will decide what to do with it, and with this note. Archie will require from you a list of your husband's associates, including your brother-in-law. You will comply." If you withhold, I will know, and you will waste my time. Do not waste my time, Leonard bristled. You have no authority. I have authority because you are here, Wolfe cut in, his tone final. If you wished silence, you should have stayed away. It was one of those moments when the brownstone air thickened. Leonard's fists clenched. Kent's jaw hardened. But neither man rose. Mrs. Veron let out a slow breath as if she'd been holding it since she entered. I collected their information as Wolfe dictated, my pen scratching across the pad. When it was done, Wolfe dismissed them with a flick of his hand as though shooing pigeons. I saw them out, though Leonard nearly burned a hole in my back with his glare. Mrs. Veron managed a grateful glance, but she didn't speak. When I returned, Wolfe was studying the case again. His eyes were half-lidded but sharp. Archie, he said, we are no longer concerned with a spoon. We are concerned with identity. Someone fears disclosure. That emblem was not decoration. It was testimony. I leaned against the desk, crossing my arms. And whoever stole it thinks they just erased the testimony. Erased the testimony. Wolfe nodded once heavily. But they are wrong. Because they have already declared themselves by the very act of removal. I grinned. So now the fun starts. Yes, Wolfe said, and reached for the bell to summon beer. Now the fun starts. Lon Cohen called back just after 5, proving once again that a newspaperman with a nose for gossip could move faster than any police file. I took the call in the front room and scribbled on the pad while he rattled. When I came back into the office, Wolfe was finishing his beer, the empty glass balanced on his palm like a relic. Newsprint loves the Verons, I reported. Mostly business stuff. Shipping investments, some South American ventures, a failed deal in Chile that cost a few investors a tidy sum. Your boy Harold Kent's name shows up too. Apparently he was in court defending Veron against some contract breach, which got settled quietly. And here's the kicker. 10 years ago, Veron was tangentially linked to a private society called the Order of St. Egidius. Closed circle, invitation only. Their emblem? I tapped my notes. A silver crest shaped like a cross with a small spoon worked into the design. Wolfe's eyes gleamed for half a second, before he suppressed it. He set the glass down and steepled his fingers. So the spoon was not an ornament, but a badge. Exactly. And if you ask me, it sounds like one of those clubs where rich men drink port, toast tradition, and pull strings behind closed doors. Then someone has severed the badge, Wolfe said, almost to himself. To conceal or to claim? He closed his eyes, his voice dropping into the low hum that meant he was calculating. Did Lon provide names of other members? Not yet. He said they guard their roles tighter than a banker guards his mistress. But he promised to dig. Good, Wolfe murmured. But we will not wait. He opened his eyes and fixed them on me. Archie, you will visit Mrs. Veron this evening, discreetly. Inform her that her husband's relic was a membership token. Gauge her reaction. More importantly, observe if others have already taken up vigil around her house. They will not leave her unguarded. That was Wolfe's way of saying he suspected surveillance, which meant Saul Panzer would be next on speed dial. But Wolfe wasn't ready to call him yet. He wanted me to stir the water first. I left around 7, after Fritz had fortified me with lamb chops, and took a cab uptown. Mrs. Veron's townhouse was the kind that had pretensions of grandeur, but lived in the shadow of real money. Lights were on in the front parlor, and through the window I saw her pacing, still in her pearls. When she admitted me, her relief was too quick, too rehearsed. You've spoken with Mr. Wolfe? She asked. I have, and you'll be glad to know he's already turning over stones. But he needs clarity. Your late husband, did he belong to a group called the Order of St. Egidius? Her hands froze on the clasp of her necklace. She tried to smile, failed, and sat down. So he told you? Not exactly, I said. We dug it up. But you can confirm. She pressed her lips together, then nodded. Yes, he called it a brotherhood. I was never allowed to ask questions, but he attended meetings, secret ones. I suspected it wasn't just a club. Once I overheard an argument between him and Leonard about the Order's obligations. He silenced me when I asked. I studied her, noting the tremor in her hands, the dart of her eyes toward the darkened hallway. And this emblem that's missing, it was their sign. Yes, she whispered. And if it's gone, it means someone from the Order is trying to erase his place in it, or claim it for themselves. I don't know which is worse. Before I could press, a sound came from the stoop, footsteps quick and deliberate. I moved to the window and caught sight of a figure slipping into the shadows across the street, too fast to be a casual passerby. Tall, narrow build, coat collar turned up, watching. I turned back to her. Looks like Wolfe was right. You've got company tonight. Someone thinks you might be worth observing. Her face drained of color. What should I do? Do nothing, I said. I'll report back. But you might want to lock your windows. I left her house with that pair of eyes still burning from across the street. When I hailed a cab, the figure shifted but didn't follow. It wasn't pursuit they wanted. It was intimidation. I knew enough to smell it. By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe had stationed himself with another beer, calm as a Buddha. I gave him the play-by-play. He listened, nodding once. Then he said, "Archie, call Saul. We must know who keeps vigil in the shadows. And if we are correct, who wishes to bury the past beneath our very noses." Saul Panzer arrived the next morning, punctual as a Swiss watch, with the air of a man who could melt into a crowd and still take its pulse. He came into the office, nodded to Wolfe, and sat when I waved him in. Wolfe barely lifted a finger in greeting, his way of acknowledging that when he summoned Saul, it was business, not friendship. I gave Saul the rundown while Wolfe sipped beer at 10 in the morning, which was his version of a standing ovation for Fritz's breakfast. Saul listened without a blink, committing every detail to that private ledger in his head. "You want him tagged?" Saul asked finally. "Yes," Wolfe said. "The watcher outside Mrs. Veron's townhouse. Tall, narrow build, cautious enough to shadow but not bold enough to confront. Identify him. Learn his affiliations. Report promptly." "Done," Saul said simply, and that was that. He left without another word. Wolfe leaned back, shut his eyes, and let his lips press together in a thin line. "Archie, the pieces form a pattern. This order, its emblem was not simply decorative. It was a token of authority within their circle. If removed, its absence signifies repudiation or transfer. Either way, it alters the standing of the deceased. Someone wishes to redefine Mr. Veron after his death. Rewrite the obituary, you mean?" I said. "Precisely. And the burglary, the note, the surveillance, they are symptoms of the same disease, fear of exposure." I jotted that in my notebook, though I already knew the drill. Fear of exposure was Wolfe's bread and butter. You could smell it the way a chef smells garlic. By early afternoon, Lon called again. "Got a partial list," he told me. The Order of St. Egidius isn't just a drinking society. It's a quiet fraternity of financiers, judges and industrialists who believe in keeping their affairs controlled. Names include Leonard Varan, big surprise, Harold Kent, and at least 2 judges who won't want ink on this. And rumor has it, they kept leverage on one another, tokens to remind each member of their bond. When I relayed this to Wolfe, he closed his eyes and nodded once, heavy as a gavel. Leverage. Then the spoon was not simply a token, but evidence. And its emblem, possibly unique, personalized, was removed to destroy or reclaim that evidence. Whoever possesses it now wields power. Which means we're not chasing silver anymore, I said. "We're chasing blackmail." "Indeed," Wolfe replied, "and blackmail is more odious than murder, for it corrodes the soul while sparing the body. We must discover who profits from this removal, and who trembles at the prospect of disclosure." At 6, Saul called with his report. He had tailed the watcher, a cautious man in a grey overcoat, to a midtown office building where Harold Kent kept his law practice. "Didn't go inside," Saul said. "But it's Kent's runner. Name's Marlowe. Private investigator, does errands." Wolfe's eyes flicked open, gleaming. So the family lawyer places eyes upon the widow. Curious, perhaps to safeguard her. More likely to measure her. I frowned. Kent was quick to warn us off. "Maybe he's less worried about the spoon than about what it proves." "Archie," Wolfe said, his tone final, "tomorrow we shall bring Kent to heel. Meanwhile, summon Mrs. Veron again, and invite her brother-in-law. Their presence together will produce the friction necessary to reveal more than they intend." I raised a brow. "And I suppose you'll be the one striking the match?" Wolfe's mouth curved into that faint, grim line that was his closest imitation of a smile. "No, Archie, I will merely provide the room. The fire will come of its own accord." They came the next afternoon, not together, but close enough to make me think one had shadowed the other. Mrs. Veron arrived first, composed but with the tremor of a woman expecting the floor to shift under her feet. Leonard followed 10 minutes later, jaw set like he was marching into enemy territory. I showed them both into Wolfe's office, where Wolfe sat planted in his chair as if the roots of his orchids had crept into him overnight. Wolfe wasted no time with pleasantries. "Madam, Mr. Varen, I require candor. Your late husband's connection to the Order of St. Egidius is established. The spoon's emblem was not trinketry, but a token of membership, perhaps of rank. It is gone. That is not coincidence." Mrs. Varen's eyes widened, but she didn't speak. Leonard scowled. "My brother's associations were his own affair. That spoon means nothing now." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, his voice low and deliberate. "It means everything. It has been excised with precision." "And yesterday your attorney's agent observed your sister-in-law's home." He turned his gaze to Mrs. Varen. "Did you know that?" She gasped, eyes darting toward Leonard. "Harold, why?" Leonard shifted, his lips pressed tight, but Wolfe didn't give him space to answer. "Mr. Kent, I suspect, fears what you might disclose. Perhaps your husband entrusted you with knowledge. Perhaps not. But the surveillance speaks for itself." I watched the room tilt. Mrs. Varen's shock was raw, but Leonard's discomfort was worse. He was working too hard to keep still. He muttered, "Kent acts for the estate. He has a duty." "Duty," Wolfe cut in, his voice sharp as a razor, "is a word often employed to mask dread. What truth lies buried, Mr. Varen, and why does your lawyer quake at its unearthing?" The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Mrs. Varen broke it first. "Leonard, what do you know?" His fists clenched. "Nothing. And you'd be wise to stop chasing ghosts. Yet you are here," Wolfe said softly. "If you feared nothing, you would stay away. Instead, you sit in my office, straining against disclosure. That is eloquence enough." I could see Leonard's composure fraying, the skin tight around his temples. He looked ready to bolt or swing, but Wolfe's gaze held him like a vice. "Archie," Wolfe said, not shifting his eyes, "fetch Mr. Kent tomorrow. He will attend. He cannot evade this circle. For now, escort our guests out. They have supplied what they came to conceal." Mrs. Varen rose, shaken but obedient. Leonard followed, his face a mask that barely hid the storm brewing underneath. When I closed the door behind them, Wolfe exhaled heavily, a sound halfway between irritation and satisfaction. "They confirm what we already surmised," he said. "The spoon was leverage, and the removal has unsettled their order. We shall compel the lawyer to yield the remainder. Then, Archie, we will summon them all and the truth will surface, willing or not." He reached for his beer. That was his declaration. The battlefield had been chosen, and Wolfe had no intention of leaving his chair to win it. Harold Kent didn't like being summoned, which made it all the more satisfying when he arrived at the brownstone the next morning, with his dignity polished, but his eyes wary. He carried himself as though he were entering a courtroom. Only here the bench was Wolfe's oversized chair, and the jury consisted of me leaning against the wall with my notebook. He refused coffee, adjusted his tie, and sat stiffly across from Wolfe like a man preparing to fend off cross-examination. Wolfe gave him no relief. "Mr. Kent, your zeal to dissuade inquiry was wasted. Your agent was observed watching Mrs. Varen's home. I dislike evasions, so we will dispense with them. Why are you monitoring the widow?" Kent's mouth tightened into a line. "As the family's legal representative, I am obliged to protect their interests. Mrs. Varen is vulnerable and—" "Phooey," Wolfe interrupted, his voice heavy with contempt. "You protect no one. You fear. If the emblem were meaningless, you would not expend effort shadowing her. What does it signify?" Kent's hands curled around the arms of his chair. "It signifies nothing that concerns you. The Order is a private society, which your late client belonged to," Wolfe said, "and which you, I surmise, also serve, perhaps unofficially. That emblem was excised to bury a truth. Yet by its absence it proclaims itself louder. What is concealed, Mr. Kent? Speak." I watched Kent's jaw twitch. He tried to hold the line, but Wolfe's stare worked on him the way a crowbar works on a locked trunk. Finally, he exhaled through his nose. "The Order is built on loyalty. Each man held a token. If that token was taken, it meant he had broken faith. It meant expulsion, disgrace, exposure. Your spoon, Mr. Wolfe, was not just silver. It was evidence. And now that it has been mutilated, every man who belonged fears he may be next." That was something, and Wolfe's eyes flickered with satisfaction. So the emblem was a verdict. Removed, it proclaims guilt. Whose guilt, Mr. Kent? Kent shook his head. I don't know. I only know my late client feared the day it might be taken. He said it would ruin not just him but others. And now it is gone. The silence that followed was taut. Wolfe leaned back, his lids drooping, his voice slow and deliberate. So, a secret tribunal, a badge of fidelity, and a theft that rewrites a man's epitaph. This is no trifle of vanity. It is sabotage within the order. I leaned forward. Which means someone inside wanted Varen erased or marked. Indeed, Wolfe said. And we will know who. Tomorrow evening, Archie, summon them all. Mrs. Varen, her brother-in-law Kent, and any other name we have. They will sit here in this room, and they will squirm until the truth surfaces. Kent's face tightened, but he said nothing. Wolfe had already closed his eyes again, dismissing him without a word. I showed him out, resisting the urge to tip an imaginary hat. When I came back, Wolfe had reached for his beer, the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of his lips. The spoon, he murmured, has stirred enough. Tomorrow, Archie, it will boil. The next evening, the brownstone felt more like a stage than a home. Fritz kept his distance, no doubt sensing the storm that was about to blow through, while I arranged the chairs in Wolfe's office the way he liked them. 2 on the left, 2 on the right, each angled toward Wolfe as though the occupants were petitioners before a throne. The spoon's case sat on Wolfe's desk, closed, silent like the bait in a trap. They arrived in staggered succession. Mrs. Varen first, clutching her gloves in both hands like they were a lifeline. Leonard followed, stiff with hostility, his eyes sweeping the room as though daring it to judge him. Kent came next, his lawyer's mask back in place, lips pressed thin as paper. Salpanzer had reported he would linger in the neighborhood, unobtrusive but ready in case anyone tried to bolt. Wolfe, of course, hadn't moved an inch since the morning, planted in his chair with a glass of beer beside him, eyelids heavy but gaze sharp enough to cut glass. Once they were seated, Wolfe wasted no time. "You are here because the emblem was removed," he said, his voice filling the room without effort. That act was not vandalism but censure. Someone judged Mr. Varen guilty and proclaimed it with his token. The question before us is simple. Who acted and why? Leonard barked a short laugh. "You speak as if you know the Order's secrets better than we do." "It's better than we do." "I know enough," Wolfe said. "The emblem marked fidelity. Its removal was a declaration of infidelity, but Mr. Varen is dead. So the declaration was not for him. It was for those he left behind." Mrs. Varen flinched and Wolfe's gaze pinned her. "Madam, your husband confided in you." He feared this moment. "Did he not?" She nodded slowly. "He told me. If the spoon was ever tampered with, it would mean his past had caught him. He said it would not stop with him." Kent leaned forward sharply. "This is reckless, Mr. Wolfe. You are manufacturing menace from superstition." "No," Wolfe said, the word as heavy as stone. "You are the one manufacturing silence. Your surveillance proves it. You knew someone within the Order had struck, and you feared Mrs. Varen might reveal what her husband withheld." Leonard shot Kent a look, then back to Wolfe. "And what exactly do you think she knows?" Wolfe ignored him. His eyes slid shut for a moment, then reopened. "Archie, the note. I laid the envelope on the desk where all could see. Leave the past buried. Someone feared disclosure," Wolfe continued, "but the act of theft disclosed more than words. Whoever removed that emblem sought not only to erase Varen, but to terrify those still living. And only one among you had both the knowledge of its meaning and the proximity to act." His gaze moved from Mrs. Varen to Leonard, then stopped, cold and immovable, on Kent. The lawyer stiffened, color rising in his face. "That is absurd, is it?" Wolfe said almost lazily. "You had access to his effects when the estate was settled. You had motive, to protect other members of the Order whose reputations you guard. And you had method. You employ men who can open a lock without leaving a scar. You removed the emblem, Mr. Kent, to brand your client guilty and to frighten his widow into silence. But instead you have declared yourself." The air thickened, every eye on Kent. His lips moved, but no words came. Finally he managed. "You cannot prove—" "I do not need to prove," Wolfe said, his tone final. "The proof lies in your panic, in your surveillance, in your haste to keep us at bay. You feared that spoon more than any thief could. And now the fear has named you." Kent's composure cracked. Sweat dotted his brow. Leonard shifted uneasily, as though wondering how much of this collapse might splash onto him. Mrs. Varen sat frozen. Eyes wide as if the room itself had tilted beneath her. Wolfe reached for his beer, lifted it with deliberate calm and drank. You may all go. The emblem is gone, but the truth is not. It remains here in this room where it cannot be buried. I stood ready to usher them out, though I could see Kent's legs trembling as he rose. The trap had sprung, and though Wolfe hadn't moved an inch, the victory was already his. When the door closed behind them, the air in the office seemed to exhale. Wolfe set his empty glass down with the satisfaction of a man who had just concluded a duel without rising from his chair. I lingered by the door, listening for echoes on the stoop, but only silence drifted back. You dropped it on Kent heavy, I said, crossing back to the desk. But he didn't exactly sign a confession. He could still wriggle. Wolfe's eyes closed. He will wriggle, yes. That is the instinct of a cornered eel. But in his effort to slip free, he will expose what remains concealed. And in the meantime? I asked. Mrs. Veron's still shaking like she's expecting lightning to strike. Leonard looks like he's ready to throttle her. And Kent's liable to send his runner back to Snoop or worse, which is why, Wolfe said, his lids half lifting. You will ensure Mrs. Veron is not left unattended. Saul can shadow discreetly. If Kent attempts further intimidation, we will have witness to his desperation. I made a note to call Saul. And Leonard? Leonard is a problem of pride, not cunning, Wolfe replied. He resents his brother's secrets, but lacks the subtlety to exploit them. He will bluster, but his hands are clean of this emblem. His agitation is merely collateral. That sounded tidy, but my gut told me it wasn't wrapped yet. I didn't argue, though. I'd learned better than to mistake Wolfe's stillness for inertia. He could sit there looking like a man half asleep, while in his head he was building the gallows. At 10 the next morning, Saul reported in. Kent's rattled, he told me over the phone. Spent half the night in his office making calls, shredded a pile of papers himself, instead of letting his secretary handle it. That's fear if I ever saw it. I passed the update along, and Wolfe's mouth tightened in the barest smile. Good, fear compels folly. He will reach for allies, and in so doing name them. We will wait. Waiting with Wolfe wasn't empty. It was a slow tightening of a noose. He had me keep Lon Cohen close, promising him the outlines of a story if he held off running premature ink. Lon agreed, curious enough to stay patient. Fritz kept meals punctual, though the tension in the brownstone flavored the dishes more than his herbs did. By late afternoon the call came, not from Saul, not from Lon, but from Mrs. Veron herself. Her voice was taut over the line. Mr. Goodwin, please, can you come? Leonard is here and he's furious. He says I've dragged disgrace onto the family. I don't know what he might do. I glanced at Wolfe, who had been listening with half an ear. He opened his eyes, expression unreadable, and gave a single nod. Go and observe, but do not intervene unless necessity demands it. Words spoken in anger may tell us what silence will not. I grabbed my coat and left, cabbing to her townhouse. Through the parlor window I could already see the storm. Leonard pacing like a caged bull, Mrs. Veron pale and rigid in her chair. When she let me in, his eyes snapped to me hard with accusation. You and Wolfe have poisoned her mind, he spat. My brother is dead, and now you drag his name through mud. Do you know what the order will do if this spreads, do you? That, I said evenly, is exactly what Wolfe intends to find out. The truth. Mud optional. He stepped closer, veins standing out at his temple. You think Kent is guilty. You're wrong. He's just a shield. The order. If they've marked Edwin, then they'll mark the rest of us. Do you understand? It's not about him anymore. That's about survival. That was more than he meant to give away, and he knew it because he clamped his jaw shut right after. But it was enough. Enough for Wolfe to work with. I excused myself before the sparks turned to fire and headed back to the brownstone with the words still burning in my head. Wolfe listened without interruption, his eyes narrowing fractionally at the key phrases. When I finished, he breathed out slow. So, Leonard admits what Kent dared not. The order itself sanctioned this removal. It was no rogue act. It was judgment, I nodded. And now they're circling their wagons, afraid the judgment spreads. Precisely, Wolfe said. He reached for his beer, lifted it with both hands and drank deep. When he lowered the glass, his voice was calm and absolute. Then tomorrow evening, Archie, we shall call the orders bluff. We will summon them once more, and this time we will not speak of spoons or symbols. We will speak of guilt and of who profits from burying the past. His eyes closed again, final as a slammed door. The battle was set. All that remained was to watch the walls close in. The following evening, the brownstone was heavy with expectation, as though the walls themselves knew Wolfe was about to pry something loose. Fritz had retreated to the kitchen, with a stiffness that meant he'd rather be perfecting a sauce than listening to raised voices. I had the chairs arranged again, each set like a chess piece in Wolfe's deliberate layout. The spoons case remained on the desk, unopened, a silent reminder of what had set the fire burning. They came as ordered. Mrs. Verron looked brittle, as if one sharp word would shatter her composure. Leonard arrived behind her, jaw clenched, his eyes restless, scanning the room as though hunting for allies. Kent trailed last, his polish dulled by fatigue, his suit neat but his posture sagging. Saul, unobtrusive as ever, slipped in to stand in the back, his presence quiet but firm in case anyone tried improvising their own exit. Wolfe wasted no time. His voice rolled out, calm and unyielding. Yesterday, Mr. Verron revealed what his lawyer attempted to obscure. The order itself judged Edwin Verron guilty and declared it with the theft of his emblem. That act is not idle. It alters how his death is perceived and how his legacy is managed. It also endangers those who remain. Kent bristled. You distort. The order acts to preserve itself, nothing more. Pfui, Wolfe said, lips curling. Self-preservation is the shallowest motive. Someone profits from Edwin's erasure. That profit is the root of this affair. I watched Leonard stiffen, his hand twitching at his side. Wolfe's gaze slid to him, deliberate and slow. You, Mr. Verron, raged at your sister-in-law for bringing disgrace. Yet your anger is not grief, it is fear. What financial ruin do you evade by his condemnation? Leonard shot to his feet, face flushing. That's a lie. I've done nothing. Nothing except watch while my brother ruined himself with secrets. The order marked him because he broke faith. He invested order funds in ventures that collapsed. He gambled with what was not his. They cut him off. And now his widow parades his shame into the open. The room froze. Mrs. Verron gasped, pressing her gloved hands to her mouth. Kent half rose, as if he could stuff the words back into Leonard's throat, but it was too late. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Wolfe inclined his head, satisfied. So, the theft was not of silver, but of reputation. The emblem's removal branded him a thief to his brethren. And you, Mr. Kent, excised it to ensure the widow could not contest the narrative in court. Convenient for the order, convenient for you, and ruinous for the truth. Kent's composure cracked. His hands trembled as he sank back into his chair. You don't understand. If it had come out, the order would have collapsed. Men of power destroyed, investments shattered. I did what I had to do. You did what was expedient, Wolfe said coldly. But expedience is not justice. You and your order contrived to bury a man twice, once in death and again in memory. You feared the widow might resist, so you silenced her with shadows and threats. That is contemptible. Mrs. Verron's eyes brimmed with tears, though she held her chin high. Then my husband was guilty? She asked softly. Guilty of arrogance, perhaps, Wolfe said, but not alone. The order shared his ventures. They erased him to conceal their own complicity. He was a scapegoat, nothing more. Leonard sank back into his chair, face ashen. Kent stared at the floor, beaten without a blow. Wolfe leaned back, his voice final. I have no interest in your order's survival. That is your problem, but you will cease tormenting the widow. The spoon remains here as testimony. If you interfere again, the Gazette will receive a most enlightening account. Archie will see to it. That sealed it. No one argued. They rose in uneasy silence, each carrying the weight of what had been dragged into the light. I saw them out one by one, their faces stiff, their steps unsteady. When the door shut at last, the brownstone sighed back into itself. Wolfe rang for beer. He lifted it, studied the glass, and spoke with the quiet gravity that follows a battle won. Archie, men are ever eager to preserve their illusions of honor. They bury truth to guard reputation, but reputation without truth is ash. That spoon, mutilated though it is, has accomplished more than its keepers intended. It has unmasked their rot. I leaned against the desk, watching him take his long swallow. And now? Now, Wolfe said, setting the glass down. We dine. Justice has been served. Fritz will serve the rest. And with that, the brownstone returned to silence, save for the clink of silverware waiting in the dining room. Dinner that night was duck in orange glaze. which Fritz had perfected to the point where even Wolfe's mood couldn't outshine it. I did my part, eating enough for 2 men and tossing in the occasional quip. But Wolfe was unusually quiet. He wasn't brooding. He was digesting more than food. By the time we returned to the office, he had settled into his chair with the air of a man satisfied but not yet finished. "You realize," I said, pouring myself coffee, "that Kent and Leonard left here tonight looking like men who'd stepped in front of a moving truck. They'll be licking their wounds, and maybe plotting." "They will plot, yes," Wolfe said, eyes half shut. "But against whom?" "Not against me, they know better. Not against one another. Their order binds them, even in disgrace. Their only outlet was the widow, and I have foreclosed that avenue. They will stew in silence, Archie, and silence is a most exquisite punishment. Until Lon Cohen runs a headline," I added. "He's itching for one," Wolfe grunted. "Lon will wait. He knows the worth of patience. Besides, the story has already concluded. What remains is epilogue." I stretched out in the red chair, studying him. "So you're satisfied? We exposed a secret society, saved the widow from being hounded, and made sure the city's elite know you've got their measure. Case closed?" Wolfe's lips curved slightly. "You mistake me, Archie. Satisfaction lies not in victory, but in comprehension. We now comprehend why Edwin Varan died in disgrace, why his spoon was mutilated, why his widow was tormented. That is enough." I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth fill the space between us. Outside, the city churned the way it always did, full of secrets and men willing to bury them. In here, the brownstone was steady again, restored to its familiar rhythm. Wolfe unmoving, orchids waiting upstairs, Fritz fussing in the kitchen, and me carrying the words that would never make the papers. After a long silence, Wolfe opened his eyes and fixed them on me. "Archie, reflect on this. Men fear exposure more than they fear death. They will erase a friend, betray a brother, mutilate an heirloom, all to keep an illusion intact. That is the poverty of honor in our time." "That's grim," I said. "It is accurate," Wolfe replied, closing his eyes again. "And accuracy, Archie, is never grim. It is simply unavoidable." He folded his hands across his middle, the spoon's case resting on the desk like a silent witness, and let the silence claim the room once more. For Wolfe, the world was back in order. For me, it was another night with the knowledge that sometimes justice doesn't come with handcuffs, just with truth laid bare. And truth, in Wolfe's brownstone, was always the final course. The following morning began like most others in the brownstone, Wolfe upstairs with his orchids, Fritz humming in the kitchen, and me sorting the mail at my desk. Nothing unusual until I opened a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, showing the spoon's emblem before it had been pried out. The crest was clear as day, the order's cross, and beneath it a string of initials engraved in tiny, precise letters. I knew enough to recognize that whatever those initials stood for, they weren't meant for outsiders. I carried it into the office just as Wolfe descended, moving slower than gravity itself, and handed it over. He studied it without touching the corners, his eyes narrowing. "So," he murmured, "they seek to remind us, or to warn us. Looks more like they want us to know exactly what was stolen," I said. "Why send a picture unless they want to rub it in?" "They're telling us the emblem mattered more than we thought." Wolfe shook his head. "No, they are testing me. They wish to know whether I have deciphered what they fear most. These initials, these are not mere ornament. They are the ledger of complicity. Each mark ties a man to the order's dealings. Its removal was meant to erase, but this image restores it. That carried weight. If the emblem contained a record of names, then whoever pried it out hadn't destroyed it. They'd stolen it to wield as power. And now someone else had slipped a copy under our door." I leaned against the desk. "So we've got at least 2 players here. Kent, who wanted to bury the past, and someone else who thinks keeping a copy gives them leverage. That doesn't make your order look very united, nor are they," Wolfe said dryly. "Unity is a fiction cultivated by men who mistrust one another. This image tells us the fissures are widening, and fissures, Archie, always yield. Archie, always yield." The phone rang then, sharp in the heavy silence. I picked it up and found Mrs. Varan on the other end, her voice tight but steady. "Mr. Goodwin, something has happened. Leonard came to see me this morning, furious. He said the order is finished, that they've turned on each other. He left in a rage, and I fear he may do something reckless." I relayed the message, and Wolfe's expression didn't flicker. Of course, he said. When men lose the shield of secrecy, they flail. Leonard is impetuous. He may attempt to seize what he believes will save him. He tapped the photograph with one thick finger. This image was meant for us, but Leonard will think it is meant for him. He will hunt the emblem itself, desperate to recover it. I straightened. And you want me to follow? Yes, Wolfe said simply. Shadow him. Learn where he runs, whom he meets. The emblem will surface through his panic. And once it does, Archie, we shall end this charade. That was the closest Wolfe came to marching orders. I pocketed the photograph and grabbed my coat. As I stepped out into the city, I couldn't help thinking that for all their secret rituals and brotherhood, the Order of St. Egidius was cracking faster than a cheap vase. And if Wolfe was right, as he usually was, Leonard's desperation was about to drag the truth into daylight whether the Order liked it or not. Leonard wasn't hard to track. Men who burn hot don't cover their trails, they scorch them. I picked him up outside his office, striding with a pace that said he had no patience for pedestrians or traffic lights. He hailed a cab, and I slid into 2 cars back, giving the driver a nod that meant I'd tip him extra if he kept his distance. Leonard's cab cut across town, heading toward a neighborhood where law firms and private clubs sprouted like weeds with marble facades. He got out in front of a stone-fronted building with brass doors polished to a blinding shine. No sign, no nameplate, just anonymity wrapped in wealth. I knew the type, the kind of place where deals were made behind cigars and curtains. Leonard flashed something to the doorman and went inside. I waited across the street, collar up, watching the windows. Half an hour later he came out again, this time with another man at his side. Thin, sharp-featured, with eyes that swept the street the way a knife tests a cut. They spoke in low tones, too quick to catch, then broke apart. Leonard heading west, the stranger ducking into an alley. Instinct told me to follow the stranger. Wolfe could squeeze juice from Leonard later, but unknown blades were always the sharpest. I tailed him through back streets until he entered a dingy building that looked out of place in that neighborhood. Brick cracked, windows dirty, the kind of place landlords forget to insure. Inside, through a narrow window, I glimpsed a small table and something laid on it, glinting under a bare bulb. Even from across the street I knew it. The emblem, pride-free, its initials catching the light like a row of guilty signatures. I didn't need to go in. This wasn't my play. It was Wolfe's. I circled back, cab to the brownstone, and reported. Wolfe listened with his eyes closed, fingers steepled, every detail filed away like a bead on a string. Leonard led me on a crooked trail that morning, one that smelled more of desperation than strategy. He started at his office, stormed out 10 minutes later, and flagged a cab that took him to a dingy building near the river. I tailed him from a block back and watched as he disappeared inside. Saul, who joined me on Wolfe's instructions, slipped in after him while I waited by the curb. 15 minutes later, Saul returned, his expression flat but his words sharp. Leonard had confronted Kent in a second-floor office, shouting about betrayal and demanding the emblem. Kent had laughed, bitterly, like a man who knew he'd already lost control. The two nearly came to blows before Leonard bolted out the back. I reported straight to Wolfe. He listened, eyes closed, fingers steepled, absorbing every word. When I finished, he said, as expected, Leonard seeks salvation, but Kent already bartered it away. The emblem is no longer in their possession. Then who has it? I asked. Whoever delivered the photograph, Wolfe replied. A third hand in this tangle, emboldened by the Order's fracture. But no matter. The emblem itself is no longer required. We possess its image, and with it, proof of the ledger it bore. That suffices. That evening, Wolfe summoned them all once more, Mrs. Verron, Leonard, Kent, and arranged them like reluctant pupils before a schoolmaster. The photograph lay on his desk, weighted by the spoons case. You quarrel over an object, Wolfe began, his voice low but firm. But the object is immaterial. Its image is enough. These initials, engraved upon the emblem, record the complicity of the Order's members in schemes they dared not own publicly. Edwin Verron was marked to shield the rest. His death, whether natural or hastened by pressure, was convenient. The mutilation of his token was meant to cement the verdict. Kent shifted in his chair, pale and spent. Leonard clenched his fists, ready to snap. Mrs. Verron, though shaken, kept her eyes fixed on Wolfe, as though the gravity of his voice alone steadied her. You, Mr. Kent, Wolfe continued, tampered with evidence to control the narrative. You, Mr. Varen, raged because you understood what exposure meant for your fortune and your name. And yet, both of you are pawns. The order itself crumbles, undone not by external foes but by its own cowardice. Someone within chose to send this image here to me. That act proclaims the order finished. Kent tried to object, but Wolfe cut him off with a single raised hand. Enough. The emblem is gone, but the truth is not. Should you or your brethren trouble this widow again, the photograph will find its way to the Gazette. Consider this your reprieve, not your victory. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, Mrs. Varen spoke, her voice trembling but resolute. Then my husband was neither saint nor monster. He was used and discarded. Accurately put, Wolfe said. Take comfort in this, madam. Those who sought to erase him have revealed themselves instead. His memory is no longer theirs to define. I escorted them out one by one, their faces grey with resignation. When the door shut at last, the brownstone sighed back into its rightful quiet. Wolfe reached for his beer, lifted it, and spoke with the finality of a man sealing a ledger. Archie, men will always build societies to magnify themselves. But when such structures rest on secrecy, they collapse at the first touch of truth. This order is no exception. It is dust now, scattered by its own hand. I leaned back, letting the tension drain away. And all it took was a spoon. Wolfe's lips twitched, almost a smile. No, Archie. All it took was folly. The spoon merely stirred it, and with that he closed his eyes, signaling the world could wait until after dinner.